when we're thinking about the covenant of grace, it's important to recognize that it is administered differently in the Old and New Testaments. There is one covenant of grace. What does Paul say? There is one name, Acts 4:12. There is one name given under heaven by which men can be saved, Jesus Christ. 1 Timothy 2:5. There is one mediator between God and man, Jesus Christ, period. From the fall of Adam until the consummation, only Jesus Christ saves. And there is salvation at no point apart from him. There is a single gospel. But that gospel is obviously administered differently when Jesus appears on earth, lives, dies, and rises, New Testament, and the time when he was not on earth, when he had not appeared, when he had not been crucified, when he had not been raised in the Old Testament. There are clearly two different administrations of this one covenant of grace. So the question is, how is the gospel administered in the Old Testament? How is this covenant of grace administered? Well, let me just give one example from Genesis 3 because so many of the features of the gospel are so clearly present there. What happens when Adam and Eve sin against God? God instantly calls the serpent, Adam and Eve, to his presence. And he initiates enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And promises the serpent that from this seed of the woman, one will come, singular, and he will crush the serpent's head, having his heel bruised, suffering. And what is that? That is a promise of an individual messianic figure who will be like Adam in that he is from the woman's seed, but he'll be unlike Adam in that he will do what the first Adam failed to do. He'll crush the serpent's head. And then what does God do? He clothes Adam and Eve not with the fig leaves that they had used to cover themselves, but with the garments of an animal skin, the first substitutionary sacrifice that covers over the shame and the nakedness of Adam and Eve is given to them in Genesis 3. And Eve is named Eve, the mother of the living, not the dead. And as Adam and Eve depart from Eden, they look back and see a sword facing every direction, guarding entrance to Eden, so that if anyone would seek to re-enter Eden and eat from the tree of life and gain eternal life, that person would have to undergo a trial by a fiery sword of judgment. Well, what is that? It is a promise, a type, and a shadow of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ. John in John 12 identifies the serpent as Satan. Paul will say that soon Jesus will crush Satan under our feet, and in Romans 16:20. And Paul's allusions to Jesus as a second Adam, the Luke 4 narrative where Jesus is tempted as a second Adam, obeys all the way to the point of death on a cross where he crushes the serpent's head and rises 3 days later. The gospel is administered in these promises and these types and these shadows in the Old Testament. And they are a way of the Lord teaching the church about the gospel prior to the coming of Christ. And what's so amazing about it is they're not just pictures that promise Jesus, but according to Galatians 3, 6 through 9, Abraham was blessed by this very same gospel that we are blessed by. And so the point is that God not only used promises and shadows and types to foresignify or typify Jesus Christ, but he actually brought the gospel reality of Jesus Christ to bear on saints in the Old Testament prior to the coming of Jesus in the New. So there's a forward-looking gospel in promise form in the Old Testament by which the redemptive benefits of Christ are given to believers in the Old Testament. And that gives way then in the New Testament to fulfillment in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we are no longer blessed through the animal sacrifices and the paschal lamb and circumcision and and bloody rituals as believers were in the old. We are blessed in terms of the gospel now fulfilled by Jesus Christ.